Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. This is a Memorial Day edition. So, I drive into the office early today because, hey, what's a long weekend for but writing legal briefs, right? And I checked my feed a half an hour or so ago. Mike and I typically, try to communicate sometimes half an hour before the show. What are we going to talk about today? And he suggests, hey, why don't we bag? We could bag today. And I'm thinking that's a great idea. But why didn't you do that when I could have stayed home and slept?
Well, I was already up too, so
In
it
any
didn't
case, here
matter.
we are. And what a world. What a world it is. I mean, Mike, I suppose you just want to crow a little bit about the excitement that is the NBA. And will the Boston Celtics do the impossible? Will they come back from a 3-0 deficit to win the series tonight?
I'm hoping so, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. I'm going to put the image on the screen here. Did you watch the game, Norm?
No, I wish I had. I forgot about
Man,
it, frankly. Yeah.
it would have been worth it for just the last few seconds there. But the Celtics had been up as much as 10 in the fourth quarter, and they had kind of dominated the whole game. And I say dominated because they held the lead. It was very uncharacteristic of the Celtics to kind of give this lead up when they've been playing that way, but they did anyhow. And with about, I would say, 20 or so seconds left, the Heat had the ball down 2, and they got it to their best player, Jimmy Butler. He draws the foul in the corner, and somehow they go to replay, and rather than it being a 2-point foul, which would have been 2 free throws, it was a 3-point foul. So it was called a 2-point foul on the floor. They went to replay. They said it was a 3-point shooting foul. So he got 3 free throws. Now,
Wow.
again, down to 3 seconds left at this point. He hits all 3, and the Heat go up by 1. So when the pressure's on, they could have, he did what he was supposed to do. He makes all 3 of them. Celtics call timeout, which if you're not a basketball viewer in the NBA, if you call timeout on the inbound from the other side of the court, they move the ball to half court. So the Celtics inbound from half court. They don't get it to either of their best players, Jason Tatum, who you see there on the ground, or Jaylen Brown. They instead get it to one Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart immediately shoots a 3. And number 9 there, Derek White, under the basket for the Celtics, he was the inbounder. He immediately, after inbounding, makes a beeline for the basket. Smart's shot goes up, rims out, and who's there at the basket but Derek White at the last second to touch it, kiss it off the glass. Buzzer beater, Celtics win by 1, force a game 7. Seriously, one of the craziest things I've ever watched in basketball. Just didn't even seem real in the moment. And even I don't even think that you saw like Jaylen Brown in post game. He didn't even know what to say, but it was truly a wild experience.
Well, I wish I'd seen it. I don't know if I'll catch the game tonight. I mean, they have a tendency to start these games at West Coast time, 8:30 in the evening, so that the West Coast crowd can see it. But those of us who work for a living on the East Coast are like, man, if I drink coffee, I'll never sleep tonight. So I mean, it's an exciting stuff. I'm rooting for the Celtics all the way. Hey, let's pivot to the law real quick. I don't know, if anybody's actually out there reading the news on Memorial Day. Welcome, Rachel Perry Goff. You didn't expect us. Well, we didn't necessarily expect us either, but here we are. Well, I mean, in fact, on the question of expectations, let's skip ChatGPT for a second. And I want to encourage all of you to read Cormac McCarthy's new book, The Passenger. I'm a Cormac McCarthy fan. I recommended him to somebody last night, and I got a note back saying, wow, I sure hope that this book will help me restore a sense of confidence and hope in the world. And then they link to a story of a young Christian woman stoned to death by Muslims in Nigeria. Cormac McCarthy is not going to help you with that. Cormac McCarthy is not a warm and fuzzy Sally Fields kind of author. He's referred to by many as a dark Southern Gothic author. I would call him an existential realist. That is my category for him. And what he has is an unflinching ability to see life for what it is at its minimum. He's now 89 years old, nearing 90. And he just published The Passenger together with a companion volume. I think it's called Stella Maria. I'll start that tonight. And it's the story of a brother and sister. They are the children of one of the creators of atomic weapons, and they struggle with that legacy throughout their lifetime in a variety of ways that you'll have to discover by reading the novel. They're also brilliant mathematicians and brilliant people whose raw intelligence confront the basic facts of existence, and the story is about what they do with that confrontation. And I think at root, that's all of our stories. But there are some lines in Cormac McCarthy that just sort of take your breath away. At some point in the novel, he falls afoul of the feds and they're investigating him. And one of them says to him, "Are you some sort of fanatic, Mr. Western?" Western responds, "Yes, I suppose you could say that. I actually believe that my person belongs to me." I doubt that sits well with chaps such as yourself. And that just sort of nailed the sense of significance that Mike and I are talking about over and over again. You're a radical these days if you believe that your person belongs to yourself and not to the feds. And if you haven't, and as we yield a sense of personal agency, sovereignty, privacy, dignity to a digital world in which everything about us is captured, there is a sense that we're losing something of significance. But are we losing everything? And I think that might be a question that I would discuss with Cormac McCarthy or Bobby Western. But near the end of The Passenger, Western says in one of his, one of his conversations with a friend at a bar or at a restaurant. So, they're always having a drink or they're always eating. Maybe that's why I like the novel so much. But he says, he observes apropos of some discussion, if there is a common keel to our understanding, it is that we are all flawed. At the core, that is what we know. And I thought, wow, that really is true, because I don't know that there is a person who is the sum of everything they expect to be. And what we learn in the course of a long or maybe not so long life is that there is our expectations, our hope, our desire for something in the world, and then there is our place in the world, and how we adjust to the gap between our hopes, our faith, our dreams, ourselves, and what we can see of ourselves in the world around us defines our character. And McCarthy is a decidedly dark author. I think, there's a famous line in The Road, an post-apocalyptic novel he wrote, I guess, 20 years ago, father and son traveling from north to south after some apocalyptic event. And the son asks the father about the meaning of life. And the father simply says, accurately, you just go until you can't go anymore. Now, most of us want more than that. McCarthy's not been able to find more than that. And I don't have a reclamation project for McCarthy. If I could write like him, I'd be a happy man. But McCarthy is onto something when he talks about our common keel, our common understanding is that we are all flawed. At our core, that is what we know. And that is the essence of human struggle. So I see McCarthy occupying a place, at least that I occupied for most of my adult life, and that is being half a Christian. Having an implicit understanding of human imperfection and original sin, of being marred, as it were, at the inception of my life by the conflict between desires that I couldn't help but have, and the hope for something more. McCarthy writes with one of his other interlocutors, in a conversation with one of his other interlocutors, about what babies crying mean. Do they not like it here? They suddenly come out of the womb and out of perfect darkness. They probably didn't cry in the womb, but there's something about experience that evokes a sense of longing and pain in us. And so here's my challenge to Cormac McCarthy. And, you're 89, zeroing in on 90. Odds are you're not going to live forever. I think you'd say the odds of that are pretty close to certain. In fact, they are certain. But some part of you can't accept it because there is that desire for immortality, vain as it may be. And Cormac, you may be tempted to say, I don't desire it, I desire death. And his characters are uniformly bleak, but the man who writes about the character can't give up the hope for significance and meaning, which is why he continues to produce deep, novels of despair, because he cannot reconcile himself to his flaws, and he continues to try to write his way out of the human condition, and it ain't going to happen. None of us gets out of here alive. I would suggest to McCarthy a novel, I don't know, about a priest who goes to seminary as a young man, out of a sense that he's been called by God to demonstrate the efficacy, the transforming power of love in the world, but who loses his faith along the way, leaves the church after some shattering experience, perhaps sex with a boy, who knows? I mean, that would be topical. But then returns to the church in the end, because he comes to learn that the words, all have sinned, have fallen short of the glory of God, are more powerful, and are there at their most powerful when the righteous know that even their righteousness is tainted with pride, and that original sin places us in a situation of radical dependence on forces unseen to us, and hence the baby's tears, the inchoate understanding that this world is a mess. And that every attempt that we make to right it makes it messier still. And in the end, the mess consumes us. And the challenge of faith, hope, and charity is to continue to live an honest life in the face of this recognition, without ever giving up hope, and without ever acting in faith in response to the call for grace. Because I would contend, and I would love to hear McCarthy on this, that God is ever present, but nowhere within sight. And he is the hound of heaven searching for us. And we but have to say yes, and wonderful things will happen. Who knows? Cormac, that's your task. Novel number 2. I'll give you 3 years if you make it to 93. And if you don't, thank you for wonderful novels, because his existential realism is just enrapturing. It's a book that you can't read in large doses. You know, it took me about 10 days to read through it. I'd read through it a little bit every night, usually in the middle of the night when things were quiet, and I'd woken up for my midnight read. And I'm very, very grateful to Cormac McCarthy. I doubt that attorney Peter LaDuca and Stephen A. Schwartz are very grateful for ChatGPT right now. Let's pivot hard to the law. They have a client who gets injured when a cart runs into him on an Avianca airline. They sue, but they sue after a statute of limitations has run. They say, and the other side challenge, and as statute of limitations, as you probably know, means that if you have a cause of action, that is, if you turn to the courts for justice for the sort of relief that a court can provide, you must do so within periods prescribed by law. So they bring this claim against Avianca. Avianca's lawyers apparently feint in the direction of saying too late. The statute of limitations has run. They begin to do some research on the tolling of the statute of limitations. Tolling means when something stops by operation of law, a time period that a clock that is ticking is frozen by judicial fiat for any of a number of reasons. These are usually reasons sounding in equity, a sense of fairness. They can also sound in statutory requirements such as the bankruptcy code. So the lawyers for the plaintiff, I guess it's Mr. Mata in the Avianca case, turn to do legal research. And in their legal research, they discover very, very hopeful cases. A case called Varghese versus China Southern Airline Company Limited, an 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, a very powerful appellate court case. That case has citations to yet other authority, and they think, bing, 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 bing. We're safe. We can bring this cause of action. They file their motion. The other side does what lawyers do. They check the citations, and they're thinking to themselves, this doesn't sound right. I never heard of this rule, but the 11th Circuit, it's a powerful court. So they look the case up, and they can't find it. They look the language up in the cases, because all lawyers make mistakes. Okay, maybe it's really another case, and it belongs, and they got the wrong caption. They can't find that language. Now, it's not apparent from papers that have been filed in the Southern District of New York whether they ever got on the phone and spoke to the lawyers on the other side. But no matter, here's what happened. ChatGPT did the legal research. Now, you're saying, wait a minute, what lawyer in his right mind is going to go to artificial intelligence to ask for help on legal research? It's not as big a blunder, although it's a huge blunder, and we'll talk more about why that is in a moment. It's not as big a blunder as you might imagine. Most lawyers have access to electronic databases called Westlaw or LexisNexis or Bloomberg Law. And these are databases that electronically compile cases, and you can use search terms in a search function to find cases that you need. So, for example, I am working today, in fact, to complete my brief in the Alex Jones appeal of the $1.5 billion defamation judgment against him in the Sandy Hook case. And so I've gone to LexisNexis from time to time to look for cases. I found a very helpful case yesterday on a related topic. I click on a link in the database, and there's the case. I've read the case. I've used the language in it to my purposes. I put a citation to the case in my brief. Now, citation, what am I talking about? One of the first classes you take in law school is legal research, and you learn how to use things called a blue book or the uniform system of citations, because all lawyers need to learn to talk to one another. It's a very, it's not just a question of this is fair, this is just. There are rules, there are doctrines, there are precedent. And so we learn to use citations so that we can speak in shorthand to one another about what other cases have held, about rules in other cases that may be applicable to ours. And so we have trusted intermediaries, Westlaw, LexisNexis, Bloomberg Law, and no lawyer in his right mind ever stops to think, geez, I wonder if Lexis made that up. Well, it turns out that so Schwartz files the action in New York State court. It gets removed to federal court because it raises a federal question, I guess, or maybe there was diversity of jurisdiction. And he's not admitted into federal courts. He turns the case over to one of his colleagues, Peter LaDuca, and LaDuca types in a search query into ChatGPT, treating it as,
it was Schwartz. LaDuca didn't.
Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Sorry, I got those mixed up. Don't trust me. Don't trust the internet.
Let's not give him credit for making history that Schwartz made.
Or thus proving the line of Cormac McCarthy. If there is a common keel to our understanding, it is that we are all flawed. Or as Paul put it in the book of Romans, it might have been Romans 3:23. I can't remember. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Remember that one. But in any case, he goes to ChatGPT and he gets these wonderful citations. So he writes a brief. I am not time barred. There is equitable tolling, as reflected in Varghese versus China Southern Airlines Company Limited. And he gives a citation. This is the creepy part. What is a citation in this case? In the 925th volume of the F3rd series of Law Reporters, at page 1339, Judge, you will find this case. And when you read this case, you'll find out that I'm right. And when you read that case, you'll see it cites other cases like Zickerman versus Korean Airlines Company Limited, 516 F3rd 1237, another 11th Circuit case. Guess what? Those cases don't exist. So ChatGPT made this up, and it made it up in a form that every lawyer would accept, because that is what you would expect to see from a Westlaw or a Lexis search. So now, this is, I'm not going to say that Schwartz was right, but Schwartz made an understandable move, and then never verified it. Apparently, he didn't look to read the cases himself. The judge says, wait a minute. The other side points out to the judge, we can't find these cases. I mean, we don't see the language anywhere. What's going on? The judge issues an order. How about some help? So what does Schwartz do? He doubles down and he asks ChatGPT to verify itself. And it does. It makes up more stuff. And if you read the story in the New York Times or online, it actually almost sounds like legal speak. It sounds like something a lawyer could make. And you know what's odd is it's a rule that could exist but doesn't. And so many, many years ago, I had a case involving a guy, a tax fraud case. He wanted to represent himself. That's not a good idea. Well, I want you to file this motion. My due process rights were violated. I understand due process reflects a sense of fairness, but the law doesn't support your theory. My due process rights were violated. So, okay. He represented himself. I was his standby counsel, and I learned a very important lesson. The difference between a pro se, that is a non-lawyer, representing himself and a lawyer is a pro se person can spot out what he doesn't like, what's unfair, but only the lawyer knows the case law. Schwartz, and that's why you hire a lawyer, because the lawyer has experience in manipulating and understanding the law. Schwartz never sought to verify ChatGPT. He sent the ChatGPT verifications to the judge, and now the judge, this is Judge
Caselaw, I think, is
Judge
that right?
Caselaw, yeah, Kevin Caselaw in the Southern District. He's a 2003 appointment from George Bush. Has ordered a show cause hearing on June 6th to see what sanctions should be imposed on Schwartz. Schwartz is defended by saying he didn't know he couldn't trust ChatGPT.
That's crazy. That is so crazy, Norm.
Well, it's a crazy story, and I think it illustrates there's a very important rule of law. Lawyers have several cardinal rules. Zealous advocacy for your client. It is an adversarial system, but as important is candor toward the tribunal. And candor toward the tribunal means being honest with the judge. If you're advancing a legal proposition that something tastes great, but there's a case out there that says, no, it's less filling, you have to let the judge know about the case that's against the position you're taking. You can even argue positions that are against prevailing law if you have a good faith basis to believe the law should be changed or that existing law should be extended. But what you can't do is make shit up and throw it at the judge. And apparently Schwartz is going to have to explain to the judge why he chose to trust ChatGPT. And there's a moral in that story. I think that we all have come to trust and rely upon artificial intelligence in ways known and unknown to us. But as we talked about here before, I ran my bio on ChatGPT, found out it had me graduating from a law school I didn't attend, clerking for a federal judge that I never knew about, and born 6 years later than I was in fact born. Candidly, I like the bio of me in ChatGPT more than the life I live. I went to a better law school, had a more prestigious career, and I picked up 6 years of life, but it's wrong. And so what in the world is going on with artificial intelligence and ChatGPT? And more to the point, what's going on with Stephen Schwartz? So keep an eye on this case. We'll report on it when the judge renders a decision. My hunch is that he's going to discipline this man and refer him for professional, at a minimum, reprimand him and refer him for continuing legal education on the basics of legal research. And the case stands as a bright line cautionary tale. Just because you pecked something into a computer doesn't mean that what the computer spat out is reliable.
I mean, unreal to think that, number one, that there's a litigator out there that is preparing court filings in a federal district court, and ChatGPT is a part of the repertoire that he's deploying in doing so. LaDuca, to me, doesn't really avoid accountability here. His name appears on the filing, and they went through links to try and, I think Schwartz went through links to try and convince the court that LaDuca didn't have anything to do with this. But the problem, as you know, Norm, is that you can't put your name on a court filing and then also take advantage of somebody else saying, oh, no, this isn't his fault, he didn't know. Well, you're also swearing to the court, if your name appears on that you're behind the substance of whatever that filing is. So there's an issue there. I think about the client as well. What's to become of this client in this case? I know that this was a statute of limitations issue, but this distracts from a client's access to justice. And to your point, I think it's really good to think about why this would have come up. If you're on the other side as defense counsel, this is probably their bread and butter. In terms of defending against these sorts of lawsuits. And if you all of a sudden are inundated with case law that is clearly on the other side of a rule that you're very familiar with, right? These are tools that you take out of your toolbox every day. You're probably advising the client, look, this is time barred. Here's this, and this. There isn't really an issue to be worried about with this. And then all of a sudden things change. Of course, you're going to be incentivized to think critically about how it is that you as defense counsel for this airline missed something that would have made your client vulnerable in this respect, right? Because the client's going to want to know the answer to that question almost immediately. How is it that you didn't know that we were vulnerable from that perspective? So when you're talking about, attorneys being able to talk to one another through the Blue Book citations, the first thing that struck me is that, Korean Airlines or China Airlines, these very generic sounding names, how was it that, if we take Stuart Schwartz at his word, and he wasn't familiar with ChatGPT or how it could have done this, how is it that the results give a yield that is so convincing on your point, and also sound as generic as like cases citing, just other random countries' airlines, and you don't think critically to go down and find the Lexus site to correspond to what ChatGPT puts out there? If you've been practicing for 30 years and you've been using various sources to put together briefs, how is it that you use a completely new tool and then try to avail yourself of certain ignorance as to the reliability of that tool in federal court for the first time? It just, a lot of it stinks to me. And if I'm the judge, I'm slamming everybody involved with this. I expect that he'll be terminated from his employ. If he's a partner at that firm, I assume that's going to affect the future of his livelihood. But I'm not so sure that I care that much, Norman. That might sound cold, but this isn't something that other attorneys should look at as a self-governing profession and say, oh, easy. Young lawyers, especially like me, are going to be like, you're an idiot. You're an absolute joke and a treason to the practice if that's the argument that you're going to avail yourself of in front of a federal court judge, that, oh, I didn't know that it wasn't reliable. Get out of here.
Well, let's see what happens. It's going to be an interesting hearing. I wish I'm half tempted to go down. Hey, let's pivot to another AI related topic. We're talking to some folks about potentially doing some writing for us. One person on law and economics will report more on that later. But I've been inspired after some comments Mike made last week to take a look at Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics. And he begins with a good discussion of price theory as a way of allocating scarce resources on an efficient basis. And it's a great discussion of how different societies resolve that problem. Some permit the market to do it, and some have centralized means of doing so. The most glaring example being the Russian government during the era of the Soviet Union. And so the government would decide to allocate leather to shoe factories, and do so irregardless of the supply and demand considerations that Russian people were experiencing. And Sowell argues that's inefficient. And the result was proven in the collapse of the Soviet Union and the high price for shoes and long lines for people waiting for basic commodities, when you wouldn't see anything like that in the West, where there was a less centralized, more market-driven way of determining price. And Sowell keeps repeating early in the book, that's because there are too many decisions to be made, and no individual or group of individuals can keep track of them. I have been wondering, though, whether in an era of big data, we might have an algorithm substitute for the invisible hand. And we might be in a position now where the algorithm can keep track of all the data points and arrive at a vision of efficiency for the distribution of goods and services. And I don't know if Sowell has written on this topic, but I'd be curious to know if he has or if someone else has. Here's what I fear, that to the degree that big data sculpts the consumer choices that we make, in particular with respect to the consumption of social media, it offers a temptation to government or to those in power to do things like social utility score. That is, to come up with a vision of what a good person is and then allocate distribution of resources among more data points than we can conceive of, and call that efficiency. And if we do that, I think that what we're implicitly doing is adopting or being compelled to live by a vision of the good life that those individuals constructing the algorithm operate on. And I think we're tempted to do that because I think in the end, most of us prefer security to liberty. We'd rather know that we could eat, that we'd have enough calories to eat each day in a house that's just warm enough, but not too warm in the summer, and that we'll have some nominal sense of safety on our streets. And thus the dystopian vision of a managed society in which individuals are kept fat, happy, and sassy in exchange for that very thing that McCarthy talked about. I suppose you could say that I actually believe that my person belongs to me. I think in an era of big data, we are tempted to yield our sense of significance, and most of us don't care. Because the big data is doing what the invisible hand used to. But when big data becomes big daddy, I think we got a problem, and I think that's one of the problems that we're rubbing up against right now.
Oh, big data becomes big daddy.
Or it becomes Don Corleone. Now, is it true, Mike? Is it true? Is it true that you've just discovered The Godfather?
Not true that I just discovered it. I think it's true that I just rediscovered it with a general appreciation for 70s cinema. And really, I guess the context for that movie. I think I sent you a text last night making sure that, as much of a bookworm as you are, that you had at least seen The Godfather. And I've certainly seen it before, but I think I shared with you, I was raised on Arnold Schwarzenegger action movies, right? So when it came to me wanting to watch things as a younger guy, the 70s cinema wasn't exactly fast paced enough for me to want to pay attention. But now that I'm going back and, relearning some of those classics, I just thought it was interesting that that The Godfather was sort of elevated on top of. I think the opening scene is Don Corleone, conducting business, open office hours right before his daughter's wedding, and I was struck by the request of the mortician, who came in asking for justice for his wife, who had been maimed and left in a really bad health situation, and also on the back of the justice system failing him. Right, that the two perpetrators smiled at him because the judge had suspended their sentence, and they walked away free that day. And I think the question I asked you is, who is 2023's Don Corleone? Right?
I don't know. I guess we'll find out who is going to be who are going to be the candidates in 2024. Do we look to our political leaders for justice? Is our president the Don Corleone, or are we looking for someone else to make us offers we can't refuse? I mean, I don't have the answer to that. It's something to ruminate upon as the week unfolds. So we don't have a lot of activity on the chat today. I suspect that's because a lot of people are goofing off on Memorial Day. Maybe we should have, but this is my idea of goofing off and fun.
We had In the Cloud and Lawyer Will both chiming in today, so loyal listeners in both respects. And yeah, I think we'll talk later today about some of the writing that you referred to earlier. So I'm excited about that.
Cool. Give me a call when you get back to terra firma. I know you're off goofing off in parts unknown and unknowable to our viewers, but you can see a little bit of greenery out the back window. So in your room there. So I suspect you're at a retreat that has a location we can't name. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Find us where you find us. Give us a good rating. Talk us up. We're talking the world up, and it's the world you want to inhabit. You know it. We know it. Let's build it together.
See you tomorrow, Norm.
Ciao.